It is the Rotoballer PGA show for the Wells Fargo Championship off the CJ Cup. Byron Nelson. Easy how that flies off your tongue after doing it for a full week, Spence. If only we could say it the way we wanted to do. And I left my YouTube stream on in the background, and then I'm speaking to myself, and then it completely derails my entire brain, Spencer. So I'm assuming you're doing a lot better than I am this evening.
I'm doing well. This is going to be a fun tournament. We were talking a little bit off air before we came on. I'm disappointed to see Oberg pull out of this tournament. It's a unique situation here because we obviously don't have Scotty. Now you don't have Oberg. You have players like Thomas and Spieth and Hovland who are not necessarily in the best form. And then you have all the players over at Liv. This is the first time that I can recall during this entire duration that we've gone through that for an elevated event and for something that should have some stature to it. And while there are a lot of good players, this is not the greatest field I've ever seen. Like, this is the most I've seen the PGA Tour hit.
It's interesting, Spencer. I think out of nowhere, we've just been hit with a random onslaught of injuries. Willie Z's got a flare up. Scotty's got a baby up. Ludwig's got a knee up. It's just weird stuff that's going on. And I don't know what's going on with those people. And hopefully it kind of rectifies itself as we go through the year and finish out the season. But you're right, Spence. It's weird, but it's also it's exciting to not have Scotty in the field, but also like the week before a major championship. It's also like we want to get there, but it's also a designated event. So I almost prefer like the Valero ride before the Masters, you can kind of just pretend like it almost doesn't exist to like the most part,
Well, the thing is too with that, like I know there's a lot of narratives that come into play of why somebody's actually playing that event, but this kind of, like I said, this event has a lot of stature to it, but there's also no cut, which makes it a worse betting board. You have these limited fields that is also going to reduce a lot of that conversation that we want to have. So and I'm curious to see where the head-to-head market ends up trending as we get prices releasing there, but this has not been my favorite board that we have gotten so far with it. Like I really liked Oberg at the top. And as you talked about, now he has his knee problem to why he's not here. So, we're going to have to make decisions. I think for DFS, anytime you have a limited field contest, there's always discussions in game theory that we can discuss with it, but going to definitely have to try to get unique this week.
Absolutely going to have to get unique, Spence, and I'm going to need your guidance. It's either happening tonight on the Rotoballer PG show or when I'm on flag hunting with Ian. I cannot make up my mind. I've got two outrights. I had Rory in mind, and that's kind of gone to the point where it's unbettable. I woke up a touch too late to catch any rogue nines out there. This is the world we're living in. But before we do that, I do want to mention that I had a really decent week last week. It's always fun to see a week where your placement bets just smash. Like the Jake Knapp ladder. Dude, we almost, for breaking 100 to return $100 just off placements kind of thing, would have been really, really cool. If Knapp finished inside the top 5, that would have happened. I would have returned $100 profit in the placement market off of $85 worth of bets. And he just somehow tumbled down the leaderboard on Sunday, being in the final group. I think he was in the second to last group. That top 5 cashes.
Yeah, we saw that with him even when he won a handful of weeks ago. Like Sunday in contention is not his strength right now because the ball striking was incredible and it was a great call on your part with him. It was a funky tournament from start to finish. Like it looked like Pendrith is going to win, and then it looks like Ben Coles has this tournament locked up, and not a good finish for him. But yeah, it's one of those things, Byron. Like we talk about it all the time. The placement markets for you, a lot of the head-to-head matchups for me, those are going to be our bread and butter plays. And despite me not having necessarily the best week that I've had in quite some time, I got swept on my pre-tournament head-to-heads. That's not something that normally happens. The in-tournament plays for me turned it around. I ended up losing a Vincent Norman over Matt Kuchar play on Thursday where Matt Kuchar was outside of the top 140 in my model for projected score. He ends up making everything from beyond 10 feet to salvage par in all those spots and ends up just getting by Vincent Norman. So it probably should have been a sweep in my favor there. It didn't end up being that way. Very small loss at the end of the day, but you're going to have weeks like that. That's not been a tournament that has historically been that great towards my bankroll to begin with for whatever reason.
And Spencer, you had a mediocre to subpar week. You lost a unit.
Exactly.
Whoop-de freaking do. Like you lost a unit. That's bankroll management. Hashtag bankroll management. You know what I'm saying? So let's get into the Wells Fargo. Let's chat about this board. We're going to try and wrap the show up in under an hour tonight. Let's see what we can do. Some model combat coming up shortly. Some key points, Spence, that you kind of think aren't being addressed around the industry right now. I'm assuming people listening now. No, distance off the tee, long irons from 175 and out, touch of tidiness around the greens, make sure you can score on the par fives, and kind of make sure you can handle the green surface. So for me, I'm kind of a little confused about where I'm going on the greens right now. So maybe guide me through that process of your model this week.
I mean, honestly, Byron, like I think you've kind of explained the general blueprint that you want to be looking at here. And when that's the case, it does make modeling a little bit more convoluted just because everybody ends up landing under the same answers. And that's for betting, it's one thing because we're just trying to beat the sports book. Like in fairness, if you can still find a incongruity in the market based off of that, that's fine. It makes it a lot worse for DFS contests where everybody's going to be talking about distance off the tee. Everybody's going to be talking about this 13% increase that you get from 175 plus yards. These are quick Bermuda surfaces that you're going to get on all the green complexes. I think a lot for me comes down to a very course specific nature. And it's one of the things that I always say to begin with when I build my model, regardless of anything else that's transpiring with it, I still build my math longer term than most people. So I'm never going to get the exact same answer that is being out there in space. I have seen a lot of Obergs before he pulled out. I was in agreement there. Seen a lot of Wyndham Clark. That's where I ended up pivoting to in the outright market. But I still think like the one thing that when you look at for DFS here, there's an understanding, like we can look at ownership. We can try to project it out in that area. There's always the ability to get unique and different where there's leverage that presents itself. So I don't think it's such some cut and dry, some cookie cutter approach. Like we will be able for DFS to understand where all the popularity is landing, what contests we are playing, and where we need to get different from there to not have the same builds as everybody else. So, there's the problem of the models kind of spitting out the same functions or answers that at the end of the day, but I'm not that worried about it because it's the one game that we can play that I can tell you within a couple percent for the most part every single week where everybody's going to be owned. And that's the benefit of playing DFS. It's not a guessing game of who's going to be popular. It's an ability of finding the golfers you like, leveraging it in a spot where you're more aggressive or less aggressive in certain spots, and then taking that player pool and trying to attack that in the specific contest that you're playing.
Amen, buddy, because I usually started the show with recent form or course history kind of situation. The course history here most likely would be my answer. If I were to pick which one to put in my model, if I had to choose between the two, it would be course history. This course history is very sticky. And that's why the reason course history is sticky is because this course requires very specific things. That's just the simplicity of it all, right? Like that's another full circle moment, like we like to have on the show. So
yeah, I mean, you're reinventing the wheel. Like there's a reason why it's a top 10 course in predictive nature and rollover success rate year after year. A lot of times when you do get these predictive courses and we see it every single season, the reason for that stems from the 1, 2, or 3 asks that the players are going to have. It just so happens that this weekend, there's some smaller factors like the green complexes that you talked about and some things like that. But it really comes down to distance of all kind. You want distance off the tee, you want distance with your long irons, and that is the blueprint if you can add a good putter to the mix.
That's the tricky part, is trying to find who can putt well, yeah. And that's going to be how we go through our model, Spencer. So let's start our model combat series or segment for the show. We're going to go down our models and kind of compare our top 10 guys and see how they ranked out differently. Maybe we ranked some dudes different for different reasons, see how that all works out, kind of see some value options that we have. I know I'm seeing at least 2 guys that are $7,000 in my 3 guys that are $7,000 in my top 10. So there's some fun names to chat about, some guys we're really going to like, and some guys that have some definite stereotypes, or should I say stigmas, attached with them injury-wise. So we'll get in there because I've got an injured dude in my lineup, and his name is not Ludwig Oberg. So we will get into it. And just to address Joanne in the chat here before we do this, She's calling me a redneck, and I'm having a nightmare trying to match up my blue lighting with my sunburn. It's causing me nightmares from a content perspective. So if anyone knows any sort of hack to take care of sunburn and blue lights and lights behind a podcast camera, let me know. Because my golf game, as much as I was in the trees, I still somehow got sunburn, Spencer. So it was a tough weekend for me. Number 10, hit me with your guy. Number 10 for the Wells Fargo Championship, Spencer.
My list is not going to be as exciting as yours based off of the answer that you've just given me. It's, for the most part, maybe not in the exact order of the market, but my model was very in line with a lot of the things we were getting this week. Number 10 for me, I'm curious to see where you have him, just because this is a golfer that we've discussed quite frequently on this show for many different reasons of maybe your love, more so hate relationship with this player. But Hideki Matsuyama was number 10 for me. 10th for upside, 13th for safety. It's that hard course nature that really propelled him in my sheet inside the top 5 there. A lot of the weighted proximity numbers look good for this venue. So I like Hideki whenever he drops into this $8,000 sort of a price range. I always worry a little bit about the upside or the lack of upside that we have for him when he starts getting into the 9s and the 10s in some of these spots. But, I think for the most part, the form continues to remain in very stellar form. Like, I understand the 38th at the Masters is probably the worst that we've seen from him recently, but a bunch of top 12 finishes before that. The game was trending with a victory this season. I just think Hideki is more or less fairly priced. Like 8,900 is the exact going rate that my model thinks he should be. And then when we look in the outright market, you're always going to get a discrepancy that comes into play with it just because of the hold percentage. But I only had a couple points off depending on if this number drifts. Like, I think 35 to 40 is probably what the fair number is on Hideki here.
Yeah, I'll be chatting about Hideki soon, so I won't kind of chat about him too much just yet, but he's not outside my top 10. I'll give you that. So I have Tom Hoge ranked number 10 for me. And you know what, Spence? Actually, I'll just get right to Hideki. There's no need to bring him up as number 9 and have a full different conversation about it. I love his medium scoring. That's what I've essentially set this course at. Medium scoring is when the winning scores get between minus 15 and minus 10 for the top 5. That's what I kind of use as a benchmark there, and that's what this is for me. And when he's 6th in that market and when he's the number 1 scrambler around the PGA Tour, pretty much on the planet right now, this guy can scramble out of any situation. I mean, it's been fun to watch. That's going to really come through this week. He loves to hit out the rough. He's really good out the rough, like as poor as he seems to not generate as much power as most people, he's still very, very efficient out the rough. And that's more so an eye test than a statistical number there. But I like Hideki. I just don't see him. Obviously, I just never see Hideki winning until he does. And that's the situation there. But he's definitely been playing a lot better lately. I like his prospects, especially heading into the US Open, like we've chatted about, Spencer. These kind of courses suit his game. The thick cabbagey kind of, not cabbagey, but thick, like jar your ball out the rough kind of stuff and get it onto the green and make your 4 and get away from a par. That's just basically what you're trying to do. And that's what Hideki Matsuyama does very, very well. So I like to see what he can do there. My number 10 guy is Tom Hoge. I think it's just mainly got to do with the fact that now he's the best iron player in the field because Scottie Scheffler's out. And we're going to be seeing tons and tons of shots coming from that range that Tom Hoge is exceptionally good from. It's very simple here. The course history for Tom Hoge, not necessarily the greatest thing in the world, but he's also shown us this year that he can overcome poor course history based off the current form that Tom Hoge is in. And that to me is exciting. So I'll be betting him top 20 at plus 140, plus 150, wherever you can find that number there. He is going to be, once again, a top 20 bet for me as always. I'm just going to keep going back to him, even though he hurt me last week. I think he'll bounce back again with another top 20 at a ball striking paradise this week, Spence. Who is your number 9?
There's a certain route that a lot of these picks of mine have taken. It's going to be these players that have these really low birdie or better percentages compared to tour average with this, at least comparing them to one another in this field. But if you throw them on a venue like this, their win equity and their upside starts increasing. So Hideki would be one of those names. The next name for me at number 9 was Tommy Fleetwood. 11th for upside, 10th for safety, 9th overall for his grade. I think this is a nice course fit for him. The around the green stuff, the scrambling is always going to play well for him. I don't know. I've reached the point, Byron, that I'm done trying to predict victories for players like him and Cameron Young and Alex Noren. And the problem is they've become very popular. Even Alex Noren is a very prime example of this. Like, I saw Alex Noren open this week at like 40-1 to win a golf tournament. Now, he could win. That's not even the point of this. He's in great form right now, but we've gotten past the point of actually paying fair market value on any of those options for the most part, just because I think books realize that people like backing them, and you throw them at some of these more difficult courses and all of a sudden they get even more backed of this is going to be the week. There's that YOLO effect of you don't want to miss out in that position of it. So it's like people end up taking a little bit extra exposure than they normally would in those spots and jump into the mix. But I don't know, like my first couple names here, and that's like the really interesting thing about my model. These are not the quote unquote win equity candidates for me. I'm very curious to see where the ownership ends up landing, because if we can get some leverage that's created, that's where they become more playable for me. But for the most part on any of those names, like they're kind of neutral values at the end of the day. Like with Fleetwood, he's essentially in the betting market, like exactly where he should be, a little bit worse in some spots. And that comes down to ownership. Like that's a Wednesday discussion when we have a more finite understanding of where these numbers are going to land.
I'll be quite shocked to see if Fleetwood's popular. I don't see it. I guess I've got him, 20th in my upside model, 13th, if you're looking at a bit more of a long run perspective. Tommy Fleetwood is 52nd in his field in strokes gained approach this year. Yikes. But he's also second in around the green play. That's what he's very good at, and he does it repeatedly. There's certain guys where you see that number, you're not shocked it's going to continue. But to win a golf tournament, you can't be the best scrambler in the field and nothing else. Unless you Cam Smith, that's it, basically. So yeah.
Yeah, I think if you look specifically, if it's ever going to happen, it happens at a venue like this, just because the scores are a little bit, if this goes 8 under, 10 under, 12 under, you're able to scramble a little bit more than you normally would. And I think when it comes to Fleetwood's proximity or the expected proximity here, like I have him 52nd for weighted proximity, and that was really the downside number that I got, but still a 15 spot increase when compared to a normal week for him. So I do think this is a better course setup than he normally would get. And, if all of a sudden you can make a couple putts and be a little bit better than you usually are with the irons, it's a big ask to win a golf tournament for players like this, but I do think that the recipe is there for success if they can put it together.
Absolutely agree with you, Spencer. And guess what? I've actually bet Tommy Fleetwood for a top 10 as well. I got him at plus 200. This guy's
that's the better way to play it, Byron. Like that's more of where I would be going to. Yeah.
Yeah. He's top 10ing like a freak right now. His last 12 months is 50% top 10 rate. Now we get a plus 200 in a 70-man field. He's not going to win the tournament scrambling, but he can finish 8th and 7th, just chipping and putting his way around this thing, So I'm totally okay going to him in that market, especially at that price tag. That's delightful for me. Love, love, love that. I'm thinking we should get this guy MP in our chat here. He's giving us some really, really fun takes, telling us all the guys we're liking are the wrong guys. But I don't mind Tommy as a bet. We'll see how he goes in the DFS world. Max Homer is a very interesting moment there, Spence, and he'll be coming up in my top 10. I'm losing track of where we are already. Do I have to give you my number 9 guy?
Yes, you are.
I told you that's Hideki Matsuyama already, so we've already addressed that. I'm losing control of my whole mind already, and we're only 18 minutes into the show because of old MP over here giving us stuff and Darbo showing up. So what's up, Darbo? Number 8 in my model. I'm just going to jump right to number 8. You've already mentioned number 9, right?
Yeah, number 9 for me was Fleetwood.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So, well then, welcome to the show, MP. Max Homer, number 8 for me. He's definitely a better option in the DFS markets for me. I didn't quite go to the Max Homer minus 125 top 20, which is Max Homer's best market to bet him in. He's won about almost $300 in the last 12 months, trying to win 100 every time he tees it up. Max has got this weird thing going on, Spence, where he's just like lacking this upside outside of the Masters, but he's just kind of continually inside the top 20. And it's really interesting. He's kind of really becoming a professional. He's finishing inside the top 20 at a 57% rate. That's more than Tommy Fleetwood, and that's top 20 stuff. So I'm talking Tommy top 10. Again, my mind's fried. But Max Homer at this venue, I'm contemplating him for an outright even, Spencer. I'll hand off the baton to you now.
I like it, and I'll get into my next two players because I agree with what MP is saying. I would also rather play Max Home. It's one of those situations to where we're going in reverse order from 10 to 1 here, and there are certain players when push comes to shove and a button has to get clicked that I would rather go to. For me, that is a position where I would rather play Max Homa than Tommy Fleetwood. I think there's more win equity that comes into the mix. I think that's a very significant reason for why you are considering him in the outright market and why it makes a lot of sense. When I looked at this board when everything first opened, there were essentially 4 players for me that graded as a value that would be worth betting on in this spot. One was Matthew Pavon. That was my long shot deep option. That doesn't make the top 10 for me when I ran it from an overall rank perspective. From an upside number, there's a lot to like about him. He's not going to make my list that we're talking about. I do want to throw out Pavon on the show. Oberg was another. He's now out of the tournament, so we're not going to get there. The other two came down to Wyndham Clark and Max Homa. There's a reason why, we've talked already about this being a very sticky course history sort of a venue. Well, let's look at 3 of the last 4 winners have been those 2 guys. So there's a lot of reasons to like Max Homa this week. So he is the 7th golfer for me, 6th for upside. I will give the 8th golfer that I have, and then I'll kick it back over to you, Byron. I think this is a better safety play than anything else. It's kind of like the first 3 guys for me in Hideki, Fleetwood, and Siwoo. If I was making a cash game build, and Siwoo is obviously the number 8 guy based off of that, but if I was making a cash game build, that would kind of be more of the route I was taking. I do think that, and we talked about this last week, there is a certain cap ceiling that Siwoo seems to possess in a lot of these spots. And 8th in my model overall, 16th for upside, 8th for safety. Do like the 8,600 price tag. I think that becomes a little bit more enticing if the ownership can stay low enough to potentially put him into GPP contests, just because I do like where his floor sits right now. But if the ownership ends up trickling in that direction, I am completely fine pivoting into a different spot.
When you fade Siwoo Kim, he shoots at 29 to make the cut, and your major play is Sungjae Im, and he WDs before Siwoo Kim's even shot that 29. Times are tough, and I think I saw Darbo saying that he was in the sweet spot or optimal, one of the two, Siwoo at 30% ownership last week, finishing 12th or whatever. That's just disgusting to me. That shouldn't be deserving of the DFS players to take a 30% Siwoo and have him in the optimal at 12th on the leaderboard. That's just it shouldn't be the case, but Sungjae did us dirty, and that's his fault. So, Spence, my number 7 for me, Adam Scott. By the way, Siwoo is way down on my model. He's sitting all the way down here. I'm scrolling to 31st for him. So I don't necessarily think he's going to be the guy I'm going to be looking at this week. I don't know if he suits these kind of courses. I think the biggest issue he's having for me is his easy and his medium scoring is 54th in this field. He just seems to struggle at these kind of venues. I don't know. I've never been high on his upside. I'd be cool to bet Siwoo top 30 again. That's what he does.
Yeah.
Number 7, Adam Scott for me. This guy's trying to break my model, Spencer. He's got no business really being in the top 7, really, based off what he's really got up to the last little while. I've been trying to bet this guy top 20 since the cows have been trying to come home, and Adam's been breaking my heart. So I don't know what he's going to do, but this dude is a quail guy. This is a kind of course that suits. He's got distance for an old dude, man. So hit me with who your 7th guy is, and is it Adam Scott?
Adam Scott is 14th overall for me. We both talked last week on the show that he was number 1 in our model. We didn't bet him to win. There's, even if you look at the price this week, I need, and I think the number's been drifting from what I've been able to see, but even in that 50 to 1 sort of a range, I would still like a little bit more. I think it starts getting close at a certain price around there. But my 6th guy is Patrick Cantlay, 6th overall in my model, 5th for upside, 9th for safety. I know that's a very weird output to talk about where the upside is better than the safety. And The way I want to stress that is it doesn't mean necessarily, this is more from a DFS perspective. This is not upside to necessarily win the tournament. It's upside to land in the top 5 is essentially what I'm trying to find. Like I'm trying to find these boom potential plays that can come in at any price tag with it. That's where Cantlay really is popping in my model in a lot of ways. Inside the top 10 for expected strokes gained total for this course, inside the top 10 for weighted scoring. It's a really nice course fit for him. I'm curious to see where the ownership lands with him, because there is a certain stink that has come on him at this point to where people are so frustrated with him every single week. And, you get a spot here that even with the frustration, it's a $9,800 price tag. So you're not necessarily getting a rebate in price here. I would make the argument that, and this isn't to spoil the rest of the list, like if you're directly comparing a person like him or Wyndham Clark, I would rather find $700 and move up to Wyndham Clark. But I also think Wyndham Clark's going to be very popular this week. So if all of a sudden, if we can find leverage, and even if it becomes a Clark Cantlay sort of a start, I think that's certainly an option to consider here. So I'm probably going to play Cantlay when all is said and done this week. My model, anytime that it starts pushing him into this top 5 or 6 range, I usually just bite the bullet. And it's one of those things like, Byron, your Jets used to be that way. The Cleveland Browns have been that way. There were certain NFL bets that you would make where all the public is on one side and all the sharp money goes on the Jets at the price. And you kind of just don't watch the game and you close your eyes and you just check back in towards the end of the game and you realize that, oh, Mark Sanchez has fumbled and something has gone wrong or whatever has happened throughout the years with it. But I think it's one of those spots where the public is just a little bit lower than they should be on Cantlay.
I agree. I'll mention that I've got Patrick Cantlay as my third guy. He's ranked third for me. It makes tons of sense. I looked last year's model and I bet Patrick Cantlay to win after a close call at RBC. I figured maybe he can bring a bit of that form over. Turns out that was just Patrick Cantlay playing good golf at RBC like he does every single year. So that's the situation we're finding ourselves in there, and it's quite interesting. Patrick Cantlay, if you're looking to bet him in the top 10 market, would have lost you $500,000 over the last 12 months. So fun stuff from Patrick Cantlay in that degree. We'll have to see what he can do. I fancied him as a big course fit last year, Spence. I think he's a very good golfer. He should fit any venue pretty much. The guy's game is bulletproof. I think when I looked up some stats a few years ago, he was the only guy inside the top 5 who had strokes gained that was not inside the top 10 at all, but he had his strokes gained total was inside the top 5. It was just like a really weird combination of stuff. This chat is absolutely roasting me, by the way. I was getting too much time in the sun earlier. I need a black eye. I look better with a black eye than sunburn. We've got, all sorts of stuff going on in the chat. Loving it, by the way. Thank you so much. Speaking about in the chat here, we got our main man Tour Picks, aka Joe Idoni. We just got done with his show with Jeff Feinberg. Go check that out at Preferred Lines. Asking us about, is Adam Scott a shoe-in on Team International, Spencer?
Adam Scott is a shoe-in for every single elevated event at this point. Him and Webb Simpson seem to be getting into everything. I don't know. I mean, I would think that at this point, the way that he's still striking the ball, he is better than... The thing is, we have lost certain players.
A rift of talent.
Cam Smith being gone. Like, there's only so many players that are left. Like, there's a lot of names in there. I'm going to lean towards yes. This is probably his last hurrah, would be my guess. And they'll put him on the team for veteran leadership. And the skill set is still there at the end of the day. Like, it's a very interesting output that you and I think this is something that I would want to say has probably been happening for the last year, at least for me. You can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but Adam Scott has been in some fashion breaking my model for pretty much the last 15 months here. Maybe not as much as last week to where he ended up cracking the number 1 spot, but there's always these immaculate ball striking returns and these really substandard 23rd place finishes that, like, for certain price tags don't necessarily feel worth it. But I like Scott's game still. I still think he's an elite player with the way that he's striking the ball. And this, to me, is more of that venue where he actually has, maybe win equity is the wrong term, but I think legitimate upside at this venue. It's anytime you can remove some of the birdie making potential, that older skill set that he has of knowledge and the ability to traverse through a course, why can't he get to 6, 7, 8 under par and be inside the top 5 of this leaderboard? Like, that definitely feels like something that he's capable of doing.
I totally agree, buddy. I absolutely agree. So the question is he a shoo-in for the Team International, Spence?
I don't know if he's a shoo-in. I'm going to say he makes it, though.
I say too. I think his leadership, he's just old. Like for once, being old is good, I'd say, for Adam Scott. Granted, he's an old guy, still looks very young. He'd look good with the black eye too, I would imagine. Spencer, number 6 for me, Will Zalatoris. I know the guy's got a bad back. The model doesn't know that. We know that. Where do you have Will Zalatoris in your model?
It's not good.
Oh, really? Because for the upside portion of my model, he's 6th, but he's 15th for, a little bit more long run numbers, which I know we either have to adapt or fiddle with a bit because of how he played when he came back from injury. But yeah.
I'll let you talk about him and then I'll give the reasons, because there's positive trends in the model that it likes. And he does have his trajectory for upside is better than his safety numbers, but I'll let you talk about him and then I'll give my thoughts.
Yeah. Because at $7,900, I mean, this is probably a top 10, top 5 course for Will Zalatoris of any course you could wish for. Maybe the rough being a bit thicker might help him a bit more, but he should find immense success at this venue, from a long iron proximity number, from a total driving perspective, just everything major-esque around this venue translates well to what Will Zalatoris does. The injury, major concern. He has been showing some good form at these courses that he plays well at. Riv, Torrey Pines, blah, blah, Augusta. I guess he never played the greatest there, but he's been showing, he finished inside the top 20 still at Augusta, still playing solid golf considering he's coming back from an injury, which now has flared up again. So I'm going to have to wait and see. I'm not betting him. I'll be looking to play him in DFS for sure, if the ownership allows me to do that. I'm not going to do that if he's chalky at $7,900 and withdraws. I've already been through that with Sungjae last week. So what's your take?
The ownership would have to be so exceptionally low for me to consider jumping into this. And it might end up getting lower than I'm even anticipating it, but I worry about the putter. I do worry about the scrambling. I always talk about how I run things from a longer duration of time, and that should probably make it be that Zalatoris should be marginally better in my model than maybe we're getting here. And it's just not transpiring that way. He's 41st for me overall. You want to look at the long courses, he's 6th. You want to look at some of these weighted scoring marks, he's inside the top 20. It's just, 55th for weighted scrambling. He's dead last in this field for expected putting. That worries me. And then you throw in the back injury on top of everything else. And I do think, I actually don't know if I think he's going to be popular or not, because there's so much concern of a withdrawal that could come into play. There may be enough people that are willing to bite the bullet and just realize for the price tag that you're getting here at 7,900 that you have some upside that enters the mix, but he's probably a fade for me, if I'm being honest. Like, I'd rather, if he's going to beat me in DFS, congratulations. And I would love to find a head-to-head matchup against him. I don't know if that's going to be an easy thing to come across this week, because the one I've seen right now is Spieth against him. And
oh, geez, it's basically the same thing.
It's basically the same thing. And I think it's Spieth minus 120. I don't want either part of either one of those two options. So it's kind of just a pass at this moment.
Cool. So I want to just mention this, though, because I was taking a look at what he'd been up to. He played multiple starts before the Zurich, then played the Zurich. If he played last week, that would have been his 4th start. Then he would have played this week, would have been his 5th start. And then the PGA Championship for a guy who was coming off a bad back would have been his 6th consecutive start on the PGA Tour in a row. That seems like a scheduling mess up to me. Like, what are you doing making, like, who wants to lead into the PGA Championship having played 5 consecutive tournaments with the PGA being your 6th? That to me gives me a bit more hope that the back injury has to make it be a flare-up so that sponsors and whatever have to kind of be okay with it. Like, you can't say, yeah, my scheduler messed up and put me in 6 freaking starts, which ended at the PGA Championship, and then there's a designated event or signature event thereafter again, I think. I don't know, but 6 starts in a row is a lot, especially for someone coming off that back. So that's giving me a bit of hope. Who the heck knows? We'll only find out this week. Hopefully it's at low ownership and he plays okay. I don't know. We'll see. Spence, who's your guy? We're on what? Number 6 now.
Number 5 for me, it
You.
will be Sahith Theegala, and I bet him at 33-1 to win this event. There is this thing with Sahith that comes into play. It came in, at least maybe not as much this week as it did as at the Fortinet, but one of the things that I always want to see from him is what happens to the weighted proximity for the venue that he's playing when compared to his baseline, because we know a lot of those proximity numbers are subpar for the most part. He's usually near the bottom half to the very bottom of my board in expected proximity for a lot of these courses. And even when you look specifically just on any course that could be played on tour, he's 61st out of 69 players in expected proximity if you threw him anywhere in the world and said, just go play golf and we don't exactly know what we're going to get. Now, the difference that comes into play here for him is that you get this expected increase in proximity that actually makes him, depending on exactly how I ran it too, could push him into the top 35. I know that doesn't sound like some massive increase, but that's exactly what we got at the Fortinet for him, where he ended up pushing into the top 30 of that event.
Mhm.
I think when you can give him a top half sort of a expected proximity return, he's the number 1 weighted putter for me. I do think in general, when you have some of these courses here, and I've made this argument quite frequently, and we'll end up seeing what ends up transpiring with it. But when you have these hard to hit fairways, one of two things always happens in these spots. It's either that you just box yourself out, and a lot of times when those are the shorter venues and you actually need accuracy off the tee, you run into problems. And that's where I don't want Sahith. I do think at these venues where it's 7,500 plus yards and you have the ability to really hit driver in these spots and be aggressive. Like, I understand that there's certain places you cannot miss still, but usually when that's the case and you have a longer course, everybody's missing fairways at the end of the day. And when everybody's missing fairways, the golfers that actually have that upside with their driving ability end up popping. Like we saw it with Wyndham Clark. We've seen it before with a lot of, like, Justin Thomas was a very prime example of that in 2017 when he took down the PGA Championship. They're inaccurate golfers that are willing to be aggressive off the tee. And if it goes south, it goes very south, but it's also a no-cut tournament where I think the upside here for Sahith is about as good as you're going to ever get in an elevated event. So I was very happy to grab him at 33-1. I do think that as more matchups end up entering the space, I do think he's going to be the favorite against most of the opponents that he's against, because if you look at him and you directly compare him to a lot of these lower 9,000, these upper $8,000 golfers, there is a difference in my sheet. So I'm curious to see where the matchups end up going, but Sahith, if he is chalk, will be good chalk in my eyes. Like, I'm going to try to find a way to get over the public of whatever that percentage is. I'm going to be over that number this week.
Yeah. He makes so many birdies when he's on, Spencer. He's so good with the long irons right now from 200 plus. He's incredible. It's been quite a change in like skill set. He used to be like a wedge guy, and maybe he's determined, look, being a good wedge player, yeah, maybe it helps Zach Johnson, Trevelyan, and Mike Weir and the boys back in the day, but it's not the world we're living in now. Being a good long iron player is what's really going to put you in the history books by the end of the time you've played your PGA Tour golf. So maybe he's doing that, or maybe it's just how it's worked out. So, but I love Sahith as well, Spence. I've bet him to win this tournament. I've done it with that 3-way each way, like I mentioned, where I've had 2 last guys with that exact bet have finished 4th, which has been amazing. So I'm thrilled that I've been doing this each way with 3 places and had 2 4th place finishes over that run, because it means I don't cash it. But what it's still doing is it gives me a 40-1 on Sahith Theegala. And we haven't spoken about this math. We're still going to figure it out, Spence, but I'm still going at it and seeing what happens. At 40-1, give me the 3 ways. He's finished 2nd twice already this year and a 5th at the Waste Management. When he was the only one to make it through the crappy weather. What are we expecting this week? There's a bit of weather delays and things like that. He seems like he's got it, just didn't have it to get over the finish line because everyone hadn't burnt as many candles as he had throughout the week. So love what he can do, Spencer. He's my 4th ranked guy upside. I had to do a maniac override a little bit because his inconsistencies mess with things. I think if you did like a median for Sahith versus an average, like your 50th number versus your middle versus like your average, Like, so Sahith has some really bad rounds, but I feel like his middle number is a lot better than his average. I don't know. I'm just kind of making that up off the top of my head. I will find the numbers and let you guys know the next time. But that's what I'm kind of assuming Sahith Theegala is, and potentially why my model is not the biggest fan of him this week, but I am. So we'll be betting him top 5. We'll be betting him to win this tournament and playing him heavily in DFS at $9,100.
Yeah, I love that skill set. It's the Wyndham Clark skill set. Like, he may not have as much distance off the tee as Wyndham does. I would argue that, I mean, I don't know if this, I mean, at least mathematically this week, he's the better putter. I think they are both elite putters, though,
Yeah.
at the end of the
day.
On any given day. But if you give me that skill set of the distance that I think he's going to be able to bring, mixed with the increase in proximity, mixed with the number 1 projection for putting, that's how Sahith ends up winning a golf tournament.
Let's go, baby. I love it, Spence. I love it. I'll give you my 5th guy as well while I'm at it. We kind of double dip on each side of this thing here. Rory McIlroy, number 5 for me. Second from a long-term perspective, a bit more regression there because we've only had that one third-place finish at the Valero with nothing else better than, I don't think, a 19th in this year. It's not been good. So we'll have to see what Rory can get up to. I don't know what he got up to at the RBC, but when I've said this many, many times, like, I wanted to get Rory this week because after the Masters, I think Rory's going to start peaking. Like, we're going to see him blossom. We're going to see him become a peacock and let his feathers fly. Like, Captain, I'm a peacock. You got to let my feathers fly. This is it after the Masters. Like, he's weighed down by that tournament every year. I think he kind of has that relief after the Masters is done. At 11.8, Spencer, that is a spendy price tag for someone who's got some good course history here, but not necessarily playing the most consistently good golf entering the week.
I like Rory. I think the problem that came into play here, and it's unfortunate in some regards with it, like, I hit the outright on Rory and Lowry, so that's the positive that comes into play. I only bet it to win half the amount that I normally do. My only problem with this is that victory, which wasn't even a solo event to get himself across the finish line. I do think he carried Lowry in a lot of spots there on Sunday. The problem is you are now paying the price at a course that he has found a ton of success. Like, it's the course history narrative built into the price. His recent win built into the price. I understand why he is the favorite according to sportsbooks. I would still probably argue, and this is where I continue to go wrong for whatever this answer ends up being, that Xander is the best player in this field, but you have to win golf tournaments. I guess the one caveat to that is Rory also doesn't win golf tournaments unless he has a partner, Tim. So it's a really weird top of the board here because there's a lot of price tags that I don't necessarily even hate, but you have to question what the true win equity is in some of these spots from what we've seen. And that's a discussion that we'll have to figure out where ownership ends up landing with it. But my initial thought on Rory is that he's fine where he's priced, but I am curious to see where the ownership lands.
Yeah, I would imagine of Xander, Clark, and Rory, he's easily the least owned. I would imagine he's probably 10% less than the highest owned guy of the two, whether it's Xander or Clark. Likely Clark at his price.
Wyndham's going to be the most popular player, I think. He seems to be getting the most steamed right now. I clearly understand why with what my model's projecting for him too. But even if, and this is, I'll wait to save it. We'll have my portion of the Wyndham and Rory conversation in a second.
Perfect. I'm tossing it over back to you. I think number 4 and number 3 coming back, or whatever you're keeping track of.
Yeah. So my number 4 player, I don't know how we got to this point, if I'm being honest, because there is not one of the things I like to throw in for a very small percentage at the end is to take the top 10 grades and to take players that are in the top half of the field in certain areas. And the top half of the field is probably what salvaged a lot of this. But this player for me did not crack the top 10 of any of the 7 main categories that I ran that were very extensive categories. He also hasn't necessarily put together like super high-end finishes recently, but my model seems to really like him this week. I don't know if it's the hard scoring nature that comes into play. I don't know if it's that this added increase in distance that I've gotten from him inside my model. Markets absolutely hate him right now. He's a significant underdog to every single person that I've seen. If that's the case, though, for DFS, I think I'm going to be able to at least get unique and different in this spot because we're not necessarily talking about, I mean, I guess he's fine at 8,700, but Matthew Fitzpatrick is the golfer that I'm talking about right now. Fitzpatrick is never usually a name that does this in my model. He did at the Masters, which I bet him top 20, and he bogeyed the final couple holes to end up coming in 22nd place, and I lost it there. But
me too.
Yeah, and that wasn't an ideal finish there. And I had him on a Sunday matchup against Patrick Reed that also went south. But I normally, there's players like him, and all the jokes that I say about Jason Day and all this stuff, like those are usually not names that really show up in my model anymore at most courses that have how I'm running it. I'm curious that Fitzpatrick was the one name for me. Like, I would rather play Sahith. I think Sahith will be more popular, but I think as a leverage play here with Fitzpatrick, that's kind of where it's going to be intriguing for me if nobody wants to play him at that price. And it remains to be seen. We'll see where the ownership ends up landing. Maybe the price tag is cheap enough that people jump in. I haven't run ownership numbers yet. That's going to be something that I throw in on Tuesday just because I don't want that firsthand thing of like these very skewed numbers that I get on Monday. But I like Fitzpatrick. I'm going to go against the grain on that call.
Spencer, he's not in the top of my model because he's so inconsistent. I don't know how he managed to weasel his way into your rankings.
I don't know how he did either, to be honest.
But I'm tempted to pull the trigger. If I'm seeing a 40-1 out at Caesars right now, because I've got some bankroll to throw around you a little bit, would you be interested in suggesting to me to play a Matthew Fitzpatrick if he is a 40-1? I'm putting a Jeff Feinberg on my phone because I don't have Caesars on my computer. But Matthew Fitzpatrick is 35 on Caesars. I've got space.
There's negative trajectory for upside in my model. That's the only negative thing that I would say. Even based off of that answer, though, even where his overall rank is in my model to begin with, he is above all those names around him. Like if we'll even just give this from a DFS answer very quickly. Like if you compare him to Hideki, Cameron Young, Siwoo Kim, Justin Thomas, I think Thomas is probably the intriguing one there just because Thomas has shown success at this course and maybe he's found something recently. So like I'm a little bit more fringe with that comment of saying that I don't like Thomas this week as I have in weeks past. Throw Spieth, throw Henley into that mix. Like I think Fitzpatrick is in a different mold than the rest of those players for what I actually think his upside is here. So I wouldn't talk you out of it. Like to me, he was the first name that missed my outright card.
Okay. Because this is the thing. It's like, oh man, I don't want to bet him for top 5s, top 10s, anything consistent, like I don't know what I'm getting from this dude, but what I do know is he can win golf tournaments and he can play good golf on tough courses. I don't know. Maybe I'll leave it alone.
I do think 40 in a 69-man field is probably as good as you could ever expect on him. I've seen him 28-1 in contests that have more players than this with a better field, which Scotty being involved in it before.
Yeah, dude. That's the thing. It's, again, Scotty's not in this field. Like, this is the time to kind of almost load up a little bit, like almost overexpose yourself a touch. Not that you want to ever do that, but like if there's a week to do it, without a Scotty at a course that's very predictive like this, potentially you could find yourself a little overexposed. I don't want to find myself in that particular situation, but I might be heading in that route, Spence. We'll have to wait and see. I've got tons of space for him. I've got a bit more space after that too. So if I do Fitz, can I do Homer? It's going to leave me with some space. Maybe. I don't know yet. We'll have to decide before I get off here. Maybe Ian can be the final say in that world. All right, Spencer, do you have another guy to give to me, or is it my turn to chat about a second or third rank golfer?
I'll give you my third name, and I'll just very quickly touch on it because I've talked about him a lot this week. It's Wyndham Clark, second for me in upside, fifth for safety. Wyndham ended up being the number one player in strokes gained total on long courses. He was inside the top 5 for weighted strokes gained total, also strokes gained total on hard courses. This is a position with Wyndham, and I've made this joke, like I kind of credit myself as being the Wyndham whisperer in a lot of these spots, and I get these little tingling sensations with Wyndham at some of these events, and I originally was recommending Ludwig Oberg. He pulls out of the tournament. I feel like this is just nature working itself out in the way that it's supposed to be. That, look, Spencer, this is Wyndham's week. Don't not be on Wyndham. I jumped on Wyndham at 18-1. He's going to be a very popular bet. I understand that he's going to be one of the most popular players on the board just because I think when you removed Oberg from the mix and now you look at some of these prices and you look at even where the market is trending in this direction, whether it's matchups or outright prices or anything of that nature, Wyndham is moving in a direction right now to where he's a substantial favorite over everybody. I think he's going to be a popular name that's going to be taken, but it's a very similar answer that I talked about with Sahith. We've seen it before. Give me that distance that he brings to the mix. Give me a putter that's top 5 in this field and in the projected output that we're getting. And I think for me, one of the biggest things, and it's kind of a very similar blueprint that we've gotten in some ways. Like I think Wyndham has become a much better iron player. Like he's taken the steps that Theegala is hoping he can take this year. And that's why he won a major championship. But even still, like, I mean, we're looking at a top 30 projected iron player here where he has 2 massive strengths that he brings to the table with his distance and his putter. And then you throw into the mix that he's also inside of the top 21 for me in proximity from 200 plus yards. You now have the long iron play that enters the mix for him. So I think this is a tough decision of exactly what to do with him for DFS because he's going to be so popular. But I think I'm going to probably bite the bullet and just eat the chalk in this spot. And there's ways to get different. Like I'm able to construct lineups still. Like there's going to be areas of the board where there's going to be 1 or 2% that I already know that there's certain players just looking at my model right now that I'm assuming I can get vastly different by inserting them when people aren't going to be playing them at the frequency I will.
Exactly, Spencer. And that's the thing about Wyndham that Xander and Rory aren't offering you is you can get different with another $1,000 or another $1,300 on the table. You know, like that gives you some creativity, some freedom for your other 5 guys, which the other 2, the price discrepancy it's ludicrous in my opinion in the outright market and DFS. If you're asking me, you know, just based off of what he's shown us, I don't see it. You know, like they're overvaluing course history, in my opinion, way too much for Rory McIlroy, as well as, you know, the historical form that we really haven't seen from him of late. So
take it a step further, even just talking. I mean, I know this isn't even where you were going with it, but I'll kind of go in that direction. Yeah, you save a lot of money by moving down to Wyndham, but there's nothing to say that by playing Wyndham, you can't just leave extra budgets or extra funds on the table with it. So there's so many ways to get different in a 69-man field. Like I'm not necessarily worried about the very top end of the ownership. Everybody's going to carry some popularity to them. It's how I'm going to be able to traverse from there that's going to really be the key. And if that means, and I honestly think pricing is very soft in a lot of these spots. Like I kind of talked about it with, I've mentioned him now multiple times. Like I assume Pavon will be very popular this week with the price tag that we're getting here. But even still, if I view Pavon as a golfer that should have been like 7,800, and I even just consider him as a $7,800 golfer, like it's very simple that I'm going to have him above every one of those other names in the range. I can very easily leave $1,300 on the table by just moving down to him in a spot. So I think that there's ways to open up a salary build without having to worry about some of the top end names in this tournament.
Absolutely. Just build Xander and Rory lineups, take them out and add Wyndham Clark after that. Like just see what happens. You know, like that way you're being totally different. You know, that's going to be $1,000 or $1,300 left on the table. I would say he's pretty much as good as those 2, maybe not as much as Xander, but we can get to that here shortly. Spence, I've got Wyndham number 2 as well, bet him outright as well, right? As Ludwig WD popped that in the Discord there, grabbed a 20 at Bet Rivers. So that was delightful there. I do have a bit of space left now because of that. So that's good to see. Number 2, number 1 for me, Spence, Xander. I mean, there's literally long iron play, amazing form, like great course history. Almost won this thing last year with Wyndham. You know, like we don't have to even spend another 30 seconds. I don't have to spend another 30 seconds on this guy. What is your take on Xander? Because everyone knows he's good with the long irons. He's good off the tees, picked up tons of distance. Dude, he's picked up so much distance lately. So that's going to be fun for him at this venue. Woo! I'm in. Top 10 plus 115 at Bet365. What are we doing with that number? I want to almost go back again.
I agree. So of the 7 categories that I ran, he was inside the top 10 for all 7. He was the only player that could give that answer. Nobody else had better than 5 of the top 10 when looking at it. That would be Rory, who ended up possessing that. And that was the second player for me in my sheet. It does feel, and there's a certain part of me here, Byron, like I can't get there at the price. I've been arguing for so long that Xander is about to win. I still stand by that same narrative. They have priced him out of the market to where I can't get there at the price. If this was 14-1, I probably would have called it a one-man card and just been done with this, but I can't do it with where we're at with, I've seen it with Cantlay and I've seen it with Xander. Those are the two players, and even Rom when Rom was on tour. Those were the three guys that were the biggest leaks in my bankroll, that I kept betting them at what I perceived to be win equity projections that clearly were not correct. Yeah. And a lot of times when even they would win at these sorts of numbers at like 8, 9, 10-1. And with Rom even less than that, to where I couldn't get to those prices in those spots. And I'm a little bit worried that Xander is going to be the one that does it this week and he ends up getting across the finish line. But I mean, I can't keep coming on shows for the next season and saying Xander's going to win when he doesn't win golf tournaments. So I'll let him beat me. I do think that if directly comparing him and Wyndham Clark, I don't think the discrepancy, I'm kind of in agreement with you. I don't think the discrepancy is that massive between the two. I'd make the same argument with Rory that there's a lot of course history baked into this and a bunch of that victory with Lowry that's coming into play. So I'm going to try to get aggressive with Wyndham, but I thought even when Oberg was in this field, you had the four best players all priced above $10,000. Mix and match the order, whichever way that you deem to be correct with what your model is spitting out. But for me, it was Xander 1, a very close difference between Rory and Wyndham. I guess now that Oberg's out, Oberg was number 2 for me before that. But to me, these are the 3 best players. So I don't think you can go wrong in builds, but like the ownership is going to be the massive discrepancy that we're going to have to look at the end of the day. Because if Wyndham ends up being projected, I don't think we're going to get there. But if all of a sudden we start running into this territory of 40% plus, now we have to have a discussion of what we exactly want to do.
Well, think about what it would have been. It probably would have been 20% Ludwig, Wyndham, maybe, like ballpark-ish numbers. Now that 20% has just been sucked out of the slate or injected into the rest of the slate, should I say, oof.
And look at the pricing. This is the problem with why I'm so concerned with Wyndham's ownership. You have Xander and Rory that are going to be 11-5 and 11-8. The closest things to Clark in reality are going to be Patrick Cantlay and Tommy Fleetwood. We talked about Patrick Cantlay. What's the first thing? Nobody wants to play him. Nobody wants to go there. No ownership's going to move to him. Tommy Fleetwood, lack of win equity, too expensive. Don't want to pay the price tag to get up there. Maybe people jump to Homa.
No, it's going to be Clark Homa. Just start your builds that way.
I think that's exactly what's going to happen. I think that's like the most common build that's going to transpire here. And that's the problem that's going to come into play with it. I do think that there are, and this might be me just having a sickness, I do think there are certain players in this field, like a Victor Hovland. I am willing to understand that Hovland is lost right now. The upside numbers in my model absolutely love him. I don't mind taking a shot at Hovland at a course that he has found some success at in the past. Yeah. I think the Gala is going to be another name that's going to be very popular, but you're going to have to find, regardless of what the price range is, the Victor Hovlands of the world. If you don't want to go to Hovland, I'm not going to convince somebody to do something that they don't want to do, but you're going to have to find options like that to diversify and differentiate some of these builds. And I continue to think that Hovland, the thing with golf, Byron, and we have seen it so consistently, people are never more than one shot away from finding their game. Like Justin Thomas was so lost for so long, and it took a couple of good performances to, like, he got back and then all of a sudden he was lost again. And now I think everybody thinks he's once again back, and it remains to be seen with that. But I made this argument with Hovland that despite the questionable form, and maybe it's more than questionable for his standards, he was still a golfer that was shooting par or better in almost every single round that he was producing. At some point, this became a mind game for him to where he completely fell apart and had to pull out of golf tournaments just because he's become this golfer now that for him, if he's not winning, he's not happy. And I think that's the one big difference. And we can talk about all the firing of coaches and the changing of the short game and all the things that he's doing to kind of just mess with his mindset in these spots. But I think Hovland is still interesting. Like, we have not seen him since the Masters. Even before that, we had not seen him since the Players. You could argue that that's a bad thing, but he looked good on Thursday at the Masters. He imploded on Friday in the wind. What has happened over the past month for Hovland to potentially get his game back? That's the question that nobody knows the answer to.
He's too good, Spencer, to be this bad for this long. Like, he's like you said, lost himself, and he's been away for a while now. Anything is possible. Like, he literally could have found his game the week after the Masters and has been playing amazing golf since. It's very likely that is the case, because it was one area of his game. He's been really good off the tee for the last little while too, which is kind of interesting, even during this really poor stint of play. So I don't mind him either, Spence. It's going to be interesting to see what he gets up to. I think he's going to be a great pivot for sure.
I saw that Ian McNeil got him at 50-1 at one of his books. That's, like, to me, that's a wild number. That is, we keep talking about bets that you just have to place because the value's right. That number is ridiculously good. I don't think you're going to find that. You can always find mistakes out there in the market. And unfortunately right now, like, I'm trying to quickly zoom through. He looks like he's 28-1 everywhere. Like, I can't get there at the price, but
no.
I do think for DFS purposes, he's a very interesting play.
Absolutely, Spence. I love it, man. Like, the baseline's there. If he just returns to it, boy, oh boy, is that price tag and that ownership going to be delightful. Let's dive right into the 8. Spence, give me your favorite play and your least favorite play in the 8K range, and kind of just do the same as we get through the show.
So my favorite play in the $8,000 range would be, I guess, Matthew Fitzpatrick is where I'm going to get different with it.
Yeah.
My least favorite play, I don't know, because I don't think anybody's going to play Spieth, so I don't want to give a name. I actually still think that Spieth could put it together here.
Let's go from a betting perspective. No, I guess we're doing a DFS down the board here. How can I say that? If Jordan Spieth was 5%.
You could interest me on that. That's probably the problem. Let's say Russell Henley. I don't love the course setup for Henley this week.
Nope. Never played well yet, and Sex Panther is no longer Sex Panther. Like,
no,
60% of the time, he's not inside the top 20 every time. Like, he's changed his whole dynamic up. He's a boom or bust candidate. Don't like him at this golf course. Completely second you there. I'll say one of my favorite plays, pending ownership, is Benny On as well, just to be different than Fitz. I do like him a lot. If Benny On can take it to the house for us there, that would be awesome. I don't have an outright on him this week, but I do like his chances. Cam Young or On from MP. Spence, one word.
Cam.
I would go On. I don't know. It's a toss-up to me. They both translate very nicely here. I'd imagine Cam is safer, but let's chat about some 7 play options, Spencer, to wrap up the show here. Favorite, least favorite?
I think for the price tag, this is kind of where Adam Scott has a lot of playability. This is probably a much better spot than last week, because now we can get him in the 7,000s. I'll say Adam Scott is my favorite. My least favorite, I'll tell you who my model has as the least favorite. Maybe that's what's going to end up being the answer. So most of the bad values actually come in this section. So Sepp Straka, Taylor Pendrith, Sungjae Im, Shane Lowry. Those are the 4 players for me that were the worst value. I like Akshay. Akshay is another name. From an upside perspective, that was one of the biggest climbers in my model. He climbed inside the top 15 for me. I think if you're making the argument that you're trying to get a little bit more aggressive with a build, I think Akshay is probably the name to even go over Adam Scott there.
And I know Darbo doesn't necessarily care too much about ownership. A decent pivot off of Akshay would be Tom Hoagie. You're pretty much getting the same thing in a weird way. Is Akshay like a Tom Hoagie-esque kind of golfer now? It's really, don't know. Didn't see myself saying that tonight, Spence. In the 6s, favorite, least favorite. Let's get the hell out of here.
Pavon is my favorite. I thought he had the most playability and win upside of anybody in that range. It wasn't even particularly close. Like, he is in his own stratosphere when it comes to it. Like, if you look just from a discrepancy of pricing of where I think somebody should be, he was $1,400 off. Like there was really no other player that was more than like 500, 600, 700 off down in this range. I think a Cameron Davis makes some sense. Brendan Todd has been good here historically. Taylor Moore popped in my model. Like those are at least $4,000-$6,000 names that I would find interest in. From a downside perspective, I mean, I guess Adam Svensson, Adam Hadwin, the two Canadians there, like those were two of the worst values that I had on my sheet. I think with Svensson, you always get this. People want to back the ball striking, and everybody has hopes that he's going to turn around. And even when he does for one day, he can't seem to put the pieces together for 4 consecutive rounds. So he is 68th Svensson in my model out of 69 players this week.
Yeah, I've got him 54th, dude. It's not looking good, man. It hasn't been a good year for him, despite having some really opportunistic venues. I think he luckboxed his way to another top 10 at the Genesis, and that's pretty much been it for him. Another name that I don't mind, Spence, is Arsene Eckroat. Lost a bit of the plot the last 2 starts, but if we see a reversion back to a regression to what he's been up to, he's got it, man. And just to mention your point about Pavon, this year he's gained the 13th most total strokes. There's not a guy that's inside the top 20. Like there's not a 20th ranked option in the 6K range for strokes gained. Like he's light years ahead of everybody around him. Based off of a lot of that's being carried from the early start of the year, but that baseline remains. He's a very good golfer. So let's see what he can get up to.
I agree with you on that. If there's players in the $6,000 range that are inside of the top 40 of my model, and my model thought they should have been even $100 more expensive than they were, I just ran it right now to see what names would pop up there. That would be your Pavons, your Davis, Brendan Todd, Taylor Moore, Kurt Kitayama. I saw him in the chat. Kitayama, my model thought was a top 30 sort of a player for this tournament. Eric Cole, yes. I thought Eric Cole actually looked good during the team event. Him and Russ Cochran almost made the weekend, which I'm going to credit him on that. So the form might actually be turning around. I do think too that there is a certain, you can't be in contention to win a golf tournament and do what Knapp did and people necessarily like eagerly jump back into you. I think Knapp is a very interesting name to go to there. And then Eckroat would be the other one.
Yeah. With Knapp, I'm still going to lean into him in weaker fields. I think that's his like jam. I think big boy events like this, I don't know if he's thrived in them. This golf course does present a fantastic opportunity to do so. He did play nicely at the Farmers, which wasn't a designated event, but it was a big field. Maybe that translates better. I don't know. We're still trying to gather data on this guy. Incredible talent. And his swing is so powerful. He's got to feel that under pressure a few more times, I would imagine. He's going to put himself in position to feel that. Hopefully he can become comfortable with it because, yeah.
Last 2 questions, and we'll let everybody get out of here after this. Give me your overall rank on Knapp and Kitayama.
Knapp, 45 long-term, 25 for a bit more recent stuff. And Kitayama, 61st and 50th, it's
big difference for us there. So I have Kitayama 29th overall, just inside the top 33 for both safety and upside. And then for Knapp, 38th overall, top 28 for upside, 53rd for safety, which maybe that's a little bit of that boomer bust potential, but I'm okay with that boomer bust potential at a 6,000. Like I'd rather shoot for the moon on those sort of bets in that sort of a range with it. So I do think that there's a lot of $6,000 options that have real playability this week. So it should be a fun tournament. I'm curious to see where the ownership ends up trickling in over the next 24 hours, but I know you will have all your stuff out over the next 3 days. I will have my Vegas report out on Tuesday. We'll try to dive a little bit deeper into everything there. I have my outright card already included in my DraftKings article. See where the matchups end up landing. But as always, Byron, fun doing this show.
Always fun doing a show with you, Spencer. This show, I'm looking at our live count here, has got over 1,000 views between Twitter and YouTube. Twitter's a bit of a weird situation, but I know that this is the most I've ever seen. I've never seen it in the thousands. So we really, really appreciate you guys showing up for us. MP, I love you in the chat. You've brought the heat tonight, my man. Really, really impressive stuff. Thank you so much use code TOF, use code Maniac. If you're looking to get into the premium side of things, it'll save you 10% there. We are looking forward to having you guys on the Rotoballer team if you are not already. Spencer, Wells Fargo PGA Championship next week. We do have a special guest coming on the show for us, and his name does begin with the PGA, depending how you do a few prefixes and things here and there. But it's going to be a fun time with him on the show, so we look forward to having him on there. We'll see you guys next week for the Rotoballer PGA show for the PGA Championship at 9:30 Eastern on Mondays. Peace out, friends.